Hey there! Tonight we're doing something a little colder. Not dramatic, not apocalyptic, just quietly awful. We're travelling back to a year that most people alive at the time never forgot, if they made it through. The year 536, the year the sun didn't shine. There were no headlines, no warnings, no one even had a calendar to mark the date. Just a sudden, creeping greyness. A chill in the air, a harvest that didn't come, and silence where there should have been birdsong. People looked up at the sky and didn't know what they were seeing. They looked down at their fields and saw nothing growing. They looked around at each other and whispered, "Something is wrong." But we're not going to rush into disaster. We're going to walk slowly, breathe slowly, and ease our way into the dim, uncertain world of the 6th century. So before we step into the long twilight of that year, take a second to like this video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy slow collapses, soot-darkened horizons, and entire civilizations quietly unravelling beneath a pale sun. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. I always like seeing who's falling asleep to the end of the world. Now dim your lights, pull your blanket a little tighter, maybe put on a background fan, like a wind you can trust, and let's begin. You wake up, not in a bed, not under anything warm, just wrapped in a rough wool cloak curled against the inside wall of a cold house made of timber and stone. There's a fire pit in the centre, but it's gone out. No one relit it. No one could find enough dry fuel. The air inside is damp, the air outside is worse. It smells like ash and old water. The colour of the sky, if you can call it a sky, is grey. Not silver grey, not storm grey, just heavy. Like someone pulled a sheet over the sun and forgot to take it off. You sit up slowly. Your joints ache. Your breath fogs in the air even though it's nearly summer. Your neighbour is coughing again. He's been coughing for days. Thin, rasping sounds that echo through the walls like whispers. You used to think this was just a cold spring. Now it's June, and it's colder than ever. There's food, sort of. A pot of water has been simmering on and off for a few days. Inside, bark, a few wild greens, maybe a turnip, maybe just a turnip peel. You drink it anyways. It's warm. That's something. It doesn't taste like much, but nothing has lately. You used to eat bread, grains, porridge. Now the grain store is empty. The rats moved out weeks ago. Even they found better options. You step outside, there's no sun on your skin. There hasn't been for months. People talk about it in hushed voices. The priests say it's a punishment. The old woman down the path says it's the end. Someone else says the mountains exploded. But what are mountains, really, to someone who's never seen one? Just shapes on the horizon. And now, you can't see the horizon at all, and your village is quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, not the resting after a harvest kind. Just subdued. The children don't play. The animals are thin, the birds are gone. No one talks much, not because they're unfriendly, because they're tired. The local well is muddy. The river runs slower than it used to. The earth is dry near the surface, wet and rotten beneath. You used to know what time of day it was by where the light hit the trees. Now, it's always just a kind of dim, never morning and never night, just a permanent in-between. You try not to worry, you still try to work, you mend things, dig in the garden and watch the goats. But it all feels like going through the motions. The crops didn't come in the spring, the winter was hard, and now it feels like winter never left. Some of the young men went south to find help, to look for grain or warmer land. They haven't come back. The old men say it was never like this before. They talk about the sun as if it was a thing they used to own, as if someone stole it when they weren't looking. You don't argue, you don't ask questions, there aren't any answers, you just go on, one grey day at a time, and then one morning you wake up again. The fire's gone out again, the sky's still the same, and you realise it's still 5:36, and it might be 5:36 for a long, long time. You try to do what people have always done, survive. You patch the holes in your clothes with scraps from older garments. You boil moss into tea. You check on neighbours with faces that now feel hollowed out. You wake early, not because you have energy, but because your dreams are no warmer than the air. There is no colour anymore, not in the sky, not in the trees, not even in memory. Even your thoughts feel dusted in ash. Some people pray louder now, others don't pray at all. You're not sure which one you are. Most days you say something under your breath, just in case someone is listening. The elders say they've seen winters like this, but none that came in the summer, none that overstayed their welcome. They whisper that the sun has been taken, that the gods are angry, that the world is dying, not quickly but slowly and with bad manners. You nod along, not because you believe it, but because no one has a better answer. A trader passes through the village. He's thinner than he should be. His donkey has sores on its back, and its breath fogs in the morning air. He doesn't sell much. A few worn combs, some salt, dried roots wrapped in cloth. But he tells stories, and in times like these, stories are a kind of food. He says it's not just your village, not just your valley, it's the whole world. He passed through 5 towns, all of them hungry, all of them grey. He says the sky turned dark in the east too, and in the west. He says there are places where the snow fell black, where the sun rose red like blood and stayed there all day without moving. You ask if he's seen the sun. He just shakes his head. The days blur. You chop wood, even when it's wet. You mend a fence no one will lean against. You plant seeds because that's what you do, even if they won't grow. You try to keep the rhythm of a life that no longer feels like it's moving forward. You walk to the stream with a clay pot. You dip it into the cold water and watch the ripples spread. Even they look slow. On the walk home you find an animal track, a deer maybe, or a wild dog. You follow it for a while, not because you expect to catch anything, but because following something feels better than standing still. Eventually the tracks disappear into mud, and so do you. One night you sit beside the fire. Someone managed to find dry wood. It cracks faintly, like the voice of an old friend. You stare into it, and for the first time in weeks you feel something warm that isn't a fever or a lie. The flames flicker against the walls, dancing like they remember how. Someone hums an old tune. A child leans against their mother's shoulder, and for a moment, a real, small, quiet moment, things feel okay. Not better, not fixed, just less broken. That night you sleep a little deeper. You still wake before the sun. But only because the sun hasn't come back yet. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next season, or maybe not at all. But until then, you wake, you breathe, you stir the soup, you check the sky, and you try to stay alive. You decide to leave, not out of panic, not even out of hope. Just the quiet logic of someone who's already waited too long. There's no plan, no map, no destination, just the knowledge that what's behind you isn't enough. And maybe, somewhere, something still is. You walk the old paths, foot-worn tracks between forests and farms. Some are overgrown, others are muddier than they should be. You pass a dead field, a wide stretch of blackened stalks. Wheat maybe, or barley, you can't tell anymore. You press on. Villages are quieter than they used to be. You remember when children used to run ahead of strangers laughing. Now they stay indoors. Mothers watch you with blank eyes. No one greets you, not because they're rude, because they're exhausted. The few who still offer words ask what it's like where you came from. You tell them it's the same. That's all they need to hear. Sometimes you trade a handful of dried herbs for a cup of thin porridge, a threadbare scarf for a place near the fire, a story in exchange for a little silence. The stories matter more than the things, even the worst ones, especially the worst ones. You tell about a town that tried to dig deeper wells. They hit brackish water. You tell about a village that stored mushrooms in clay jars and got sick. You tell about the old man who swears he saw the sun break through for 1 second, and then it vanished again. You don't know if any of it's true, but people listen, and that's enough. You keep moving, the road gets thinner, the air stays cold even when the wind dies down. Some nights you sleep under trees, other nights in barns or sheds or places with no roofs at all. You wake up covered in dew. You learn not to feel your fingers until mid-morning. You learn what hunger does to your hearing, how it makes even silence sound like chewing. You learn that hope isn't loud, it's just the absence of dread. You reach a place that looks like it's holding together. There are chickens, there's a small garden under glass. The people don't smile, but they don't turn you away either. They let you stay for a few days. You help dig frozen ground. You haul water. You sweep ash from the edges of the bread oven that hasn't been lit in months. They tell you things you already knew, that the sun still hasn't come back, that the snow looks yellow sometimes, that the children don't cry anymore, they just go quiet. One man says he's heard this happen before, hundreds of years ago, that the world dimmed and then recovered. You ask how long it took. He shrugs. No one remembers. Eventually you leave again. Not because you have to, but because you can't stay forever. The road doesn't feel like a path anymore. It feels like a loop, like the year itself, stuck, circling, refusing to end. But you walk anyway. You pass broken mills, frozen rivers, and hollow barns. You pass travellers who no longer make eye contact. You pass shrines that used to have candles. You walk through a world that seems unsure if it wants to keep going. But one day, in the distance, a bird sings. Just once. Then nothing. But you stop. And you wait. And for a moment you believe it might sing again. It doesn't. But the silence after it feels different now. Less like loss. More like the space where something might grow again. Maybe not today. Maybe not this season. But maybe. You keep walking. And behind you somewhere, the world keeps turning, very slowly and very grey. But still it turns. You leave home with a satchel, a cloak, a piece of bread that isn't really bread anymore, and a direction, not a destination, just a way. The sky hasn't changed, still colourless, still flat, like someone painted over it with soot. But walking gives you something to do, even if your steps don't matter, even if you're not going anywhere in particular. Even if you're just chasing warmth you'll never find. The first village you pass is quiet. Too quiet. There's smoke coming from one chimney, but no dogs barking, no chickens, no voices. You knock on a door, no answer, you knock again, then leave. You've learned not to push your luck. There's a feeling that follows you now. Not fear exactly. Something softer, like being gently unwelcome in the entire world. You sleep in a collapsed barn that night. The straw is wet and sour smelling. You pull your cloak tight and lie still. You can hear the wind through a crack in the roof, but it's not sharp anymore. It's just constant, like breath. In the distance, an owl calls. You almost forgot birds made noise. You dream about a meal you had once. Wheat bread with honey, warm milk, something green. When you wake, you can still taste it. For a moment, and then it's gone again. You cross through hills the next day. The wind is worse here. Your hands are stiff and grey. Your knees hurt. Your thoughts are slower. You meet a man walking in the opposite direction. He looks like you. Too thin. Too quiet. Too far from anything. You nod to each other. Neither of you speaks. That's the rule now. If there's nothing to offer, there's nothing to say. He keeps walking. So do you. In the valley beyond, you find a dead ox lying beside a broken cart. Its eyes are gone. Its ribs show. The wood of the cart has cracked like dry skin. There's a cloth tarp covering a pile of goods, barrels of something once useful, now soggy, moulded, ruined. You take nothing. You leave everything. There's no value in rot. You try to count the days, but everyone is the same. A grey sky, a colder morning, a stranger road. Time is just walking between one disappointment and the next. You pass through a grove of leafless trees. A rabbit runs out in front of you. It startles you, not because it's dangerous, but because you forgot animals could still move. You don't chase it. You just watch it disappear into the mist. Something about that feels important. That night you stay in a church. The door is broken. The roof is partially caved in, but it's shelter. Someone once built this with intention. Now it's a pile of stones that keeps out some of the wind. You sit near what used to be an altar. You find a candle stub on the floor. No flint. No way to light it. You hold it anyway. Like a relic, like a memory of warmth. On the fourth day you find people. They've made camp near a dried-out stream. A few tents, a donkey, a child who stares at you, eyes too old for her face. You approach slowly, show your hands, speak low. They don't invite you in, but they don't turn you away. You sit by their fire, such as it is. A few damp sticks and a lot of smoke. You trade them your scarf for a cup of something warm. It tastes like boiled grass. You drink it anyway. They say they're headed south. You ask why. They shrug. Why not? You nod. That makes sense. You sit together that evening. No stories, no plans, just a group of people waiting for a world that might not return. The stars don't come out. They haven't in months. Just a low, heavy greyness. One woman points to where Orion used to be. You look up. You can't see it, but you imagine the shape. That's enough. When you leave them, they don't say goodbye. They just keep sitting, staring into a fire that doesn't really burn. You walk east. The road is soft under your feet, muddy, slick. Somewhere, far ahead, you think you see the outline of a tree blooming. You blink. It's gone. Maybe it wasn't there. Maybe it will be tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow will be different. But when the wind picks up again and the grey swallows the horizon, you remember. It's still 5:36, the year the sun disappeared, the year nothing made sense, the year that just wouldn't end. And so you walk, one step, one breath, one heartbeat at a time, and because there's nothing else to do. And for now, that's enough. Now let's shift focus. You're not a villager anymore. You're not walking dirt roads with no name. You're somewhere else. You're in Constantinople. The year is still 536. The sky is still wrong. The air still tastes like ash. But here, things feel different. Not better. Just larger. Because here, the problems wear silk robes. They sit on marble thrones. They echo through vaulted basilicas and whisper from candlelit corridors. You are a clerk. One of many. You work in a stone building with narrow windows. Your days are filled with parchment, ink, lists, reports, trade manifests, grain counts, tax complaints. Your hands are stained with ink. Your back is always sore, but lately, no one's checking the ink. There are more important things to worry about. The Emperor Justinian still rules, still signs decrees, still speaks of glory. But the glory is harder to see now. The city has grown quiet, not silent, just muted. You used to hear markets, shouting, laughter, bargaining. Now you hear footsteps on stone, a cough down a corridor, the scratch of a quill on vellum. There's food, but less than before and more expensive. The grain barges are late, or smaller, or raided. No one says famine, not yet, but you can see it waiting in the alleys. The sky here looks the same as it does everywhere else, flat, ash-coloured, without direction. The sun is a faint, ghostly blur, like the reflection of a candle in a dirty window. No one knows why. Some blame the Persians, some blame God, some say it's the end. You still go to church, everyone does. But the priests don't speak with certainty anymore. They recite the same lines, but their eyes flick upward a little too often. Justinian continues with his plans. New churches, new laws, new taxes. He wants to reunite the empire, wants to reclaim the West, wants to rebuild Rome. But even he has noticed the light has changed. He orders candles lit earlier. He adjusts the hours of court. At meetings, his voice remains strong, but his hands tremble sometimes. You hear whispers that he wakes in the night, that he fasts too long, that he's afraid to look at the sky. There's talk of trouble beyond the walls, rebellions, border raids, unrest. People don't trust the weather anymore, and when people don't trust the sky, they stop trusting each other. In the markets, arguments break out. Not loud, just sharp, over grain, over bread, over nothing. The guards stand closer to crowds now, not with weapons drawn, just with hands resting a little too easily on hilts. You walk to the harbour one day. The water looks darker than usual, like it's holding a secret. A few ships have come in, but their sails are torn, their cargo half spoiled. One captain says they passed through fog for 6 days straight. Another says the sea itself is cursed. Another says he saw birds fall dead from the sky. No one wants to believe any of it, but no one has a better story. At night you try to read by candlelight. Your eyes ache. There's a quiet in the city that presses in on the bones, kind of tension that has no centre. People keep moving, streets still fill, but something is missing, and not just the sun, something deeper, purpose, momentum, confidence. It's as though the world is trying to convince itself it's still working, even while the gears grind and smoke. You hear the emperor has fallen ill, that he's feverish, that he's confined to chambers, that the doctors don't know what to do. Officially he's fine, but you know better. The palace has drawn its curtains. Meetings are postponed, letters go unanswered. The empire continues, on paper. But the ink is drying slower now. In the square near Hagia Sophia you sit on a bench. The air smells like smoke and salt. The pigeons have vanished. A woman nearby sells soup, mostly broth, but warm. You buy a cup, sip slowly. You try not to think about how quiet it is, how grey everything feels, how far away the sun must be. This is a city that once ruled the world, that still calls itself Rome, that builds in marble and writes in gold. But now, even here in the great capital, people look up at the sky and wonder if it will ever turn blue again. You begin noticing how everyone avoids windows, how even the city's pigeons cluster lower now, nesting beneath the arches instead of on rooftops. The harbour smells different, more stagnant, less of salt, more of damp wood and rot. Scribes in your building speak in lowered voices. One says the emperor has fallen silent. Another says he's writing prophecies. A third says he's forgotten what day it is. None of it is confirmed, but everything feels believable now, because the line between truth and dread has worn thin. Once the city felt eternal, immortal, built of stone and faith. Now the stone feels heavier, the faith more fragile. You visit the baths less often, not because they're closed, but because the heat makes your chest ache. The baker down the alley burns his loaves more frequently, says he can't tell when they're done anymore, says even the coals feel different. You nod, because you've noticed it too. The fire doesn't crackle the same, the bread doesn't rise as high, the air holds something that doesn't belong. Each day bleeds into the next. The clocks still turn, the guards still change shifts, the bells still toll from the Hagia Sophia, but everything feels rehearsed, like actors continuing a play long after the audience has gone home. The fountains still run, but fewer people gather around them. The markets are open, but the stalls carry fewer goods. You buy lentils from a woman who won't meet your eyes. She doesn't say thank you, you don't expect her to. One morning you see a man standing at the sea wall. He's facing the water, hands tucked into his sleeves, still as a statue. You watch him for a while, he never moves. Later that day, someone tells you he's still there. By dusk he's gone. No one knows if he left or fell, no one wants to ask. At night, you lie awake. Your walls are quiet. The street outside is quieter. You used to hear laughter, drunken singing, children racing along the cobbles. Now it's just footsteps, and occasionally coughing. A new kind of cough. Not the dry rasp of old men. Something deeper, wet, heavy, final. You start sleeping in your cloak, even indoors, just in case you need to leave quickly. You don't know why. But it feels like something people might start doing. There are rumours now. Not just whispers, but words that carry. That ships arriving from Egypt bring more than grain. That bodies are being buried at night. That doctors have stopped taking appointments. That the emperor is changing. You hear that one of his secretaries fainted during an audience. That a servant began vomiting mid-prayer. You hear that Justinian himself won't eat. That he speaks only to God. That he thinks the darkness is a demon. You try to ignore it. But the rumours keep stacking up, like crates of spoiled olives left in the sun. Still, you work. Because what else is there? The pages need copying, the letters need stamping, the empire still demands ink. Your fingers are more calloused now. Your sleeves smell of mildew. You write in the margins of documents. Cloudy again. Fire went out too early. No birds this week. You don't know why you do it. But it feels important. Like someone, someday, should know that the world wasn't just collapsing from the top down. It was eroding quietly, in the pages, in the corners, in the people. One day you pass a priest preaching in the street. He's shouting that the end is near. No one argues. They just walk past with the stillness of people who have already reached the end and are now simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. You stop for a moment. The priest meets your eyes, and for the briefest second, you feel something like recognition. As if you both know the same secret, that the world didn't shatter. It just stopped blooming. The light dims earlier now. You used to call it twilight. Now it's just time to sleep. Even when you're not tired, even when you just woke up, you find yourself closing your eyes at random moments. Not out of fatigue, but out of habit. Because it's easier not to see the city shrinking into itself. You hear one last whisper, that Justinian is dying, that the plague is real, that death has a new rhythm now. Not loud, not sudden, just steady. Like a second heartbeat, and all you can do is keep copying letters into a book that no one may ever read. It starts small, it always does. A whisper, a cough. A merchant collapses in the harbour. They say he was from Pelusium, or maybe Alexandria, or maybe no one knew his name. They say he arrived pale, mumbling about rats, or demons, or nothing at all. The story changes with every telling. What doesn't change is what comes next. People begin to vanish from their stalls, shopkeepers close early, scribes stop coming to work. At first you assume it's the cold, the hunger, the grief. But then you hear that the baker's boy has died, and the laundry girl from the quarter by the cisterns, and the candlemaker's apprentice who was only 14. You don't know any of them personally, but the streets feel it. Thinner, quieter. The city already lost its colour. Now it begins to lose its sound. One morning you wake to find a black mark painted on your neighbour's door. You don't ask what it means, you already know. You leave water at the threshold, a small loaf, a coin. No one collects them. Later the door is open, the inside is empty, not swept, not touched, just hollow. The plague doesn't knock, it seeps. It's not dramatic, not at first. People still walk the streets, still carry water, still sit in church. But their eyes are different now, focused on nothing, or on everything at once. You hear that Justinian himself is ill. You try not to believe it, but you know what that means. If the emperor can be touched by this, what hope is there for anyone else? He disappears from public view. No more decrees, no more meetings, no more processions through the city. His palace draws in like a breath that doesn't exhale. Some say he's already dead. Others say he's recovering, or praying, or mad. Someone claims to have seen him at a window, wasted, weeping. You don't know what to believe, so you believe nothing. And that feels safer. The bodies begin to appear. At first, only one or two, on a cart, covered with blankets, whisked away before anyone can ask questions. Then more. A wagon left unattended, a stack of blankets that smells wrong, a man slumped over the fountain, a child on the church steps wrapped in cloth. The gravediggers can't keep up, neither can the priests. One day you see two monks carrying a corpse between them, chanting without rhythm, without conviction. It's not a ceremony anymore, it's a routine. The rumours say it starts with fever, then swelling, then the body turns inward, shuts down piece by piece. The skin turns dark, the breath becomes shallow. The person you knew is gone long before they stop moving. The doctors offer herbs, oils, prayer. None of it works! The plague moves like the wind, invisible, quiet, and always a step ahead. You begin to see more smoke in the streets. Not from cooking fires, but from funeral pyres. They're lit outside the walls, or in alleys, or eventually anywhere there's space. The smell is hard to describe. You try not to breathe too deeply. You try not to look too long. But it's everywhere. In your clothes, in your hair, in your thoughts. You stop going to work, not because you've been told to, just because there's no one left to give instructions. The building is locked, or abandoned. You're not sure. You return home, stay inside, boil water that doesn't need boiling. You organise your belongings, not because it helps, but because it feels like you're still participating in life. You hear that Justinian is alive, and then you hear that he's not, then that he was, briefly, then that he's recovering. No one really knows, but you picture him the way you picture everyone now, half there, flickering, tired. You wonder if he's looking out over the city, watching it shrink beneath his gaze. The empire he tried to remake crumbling without noise, not from rebellion, not from invasion, but from something too small to see. Weeks pass, or months. It's hard to tell. The bells still ring, but no one hears them. The sun never returns. The sky stays the same dull shade of warning. One morning you step outside and realise you haven't spoken to another person in 5 days. You don't miss conversation. You miss presence, footsteps, laughter, interruptions. You miss being interrupted. Eventually the plague begins to fade, not because of medicine, not because of prayers, just because it's taken enough. The carts become less frequent. The pyres burn a little slower. A woman reopens her stall. A boy draws lines in the dust with a stick. No one celebrates, no one dares. But you feel something. Not hope, just space. And space is the first thing grief needs to rest. In the palace, the emperor begins issuing edicts again. He speaks of rebuilding, of gratitude, of divine tests. But you're not listening anymore. You sweep your floor, you heat your water, you patch your coat, and you wait to see if the sky will ever change. Because the plague came and went. But the darkness never left, and the world still feels like it's holding its breath. The streets have changed, not just in how they look, but in how they sound. The footsteps that once echoed off marble now vanish into silence. The conversations that used to fill porticos and cloisters now last only a few words, then trail off into long, distracted pauses. You pass a shop with no sign. Its windows are boarded. A wax tablet hangs on the door. It says, "Closed until this passes." There's no date. There's no signature. Everyone knows it may never reopen. In the forums, the statues gather dust. They used to be polished weekly. Now no one cares. Justinian's bronze likeness, arm raised in command, watches over an empty square. The pigeons have stopped landing there. No one feeds them anymore. The fountains have gone green. The water still flows, but the city has stopped watching it. Even beauty feels irrelevant now. You visit the church again, out of habit more than faith. Inside, it's cold, the incense is thin, the candles flicker even when there's no wind. The priest reads from the Psalms with a voice that barely carries. There are fewer worshippers each time. Some died, some gave up, some simply stopped coming. The marble floor still echoes when you walk, but now it sounds like walking across an empty amphitheatre. You stay until the end of the service, not for the sermon, for the stillness. They say Justinian survived, that he rose from his bed pale and sunken, muttering prayers in languages older than Rome, that he commanded the building of new churches, not in victory but in mourning, that he began writing laws again, not for expansion but for order, as if by naming things he could hold them still. You hear that in the countryside the plague passed more gently, that those far from the cities were spared, that the wind never reached them. Then you hear that whole villages were erased, that no one came to bury the dead, that the fields turned to bramble, that even the goats wandered off. It's impossible to know what's true anymore. Truth moves slower than rumour, and rumour is the only thing that travels now. You sit in your small courtyard, once filled with vines. Now only bare branches reach up the walls. You used to hear your neighbours singing at night. Now you just hear the creak of their windows, the occasional cough, and once in a while, nothing at all. You boil lentils in a pot, stir them with a stick that's lost its varnish. You eat slowly. You count the bites. Not because you're hungry, but because it gives you something to count. One afternoon you hear something new. Laughter. It startles you. It's a child running barefoot across a muddy lane. You watch him from the doorway. His feet splash water. He shouts a nonsense rhyme. It echoes between stone walls. You can't remember the last time something echoed. You don't know whether to smile or cry, so you do neither. You just watch. And then the boy disappears around a corner and the silence returns like a tide. A man you knew from the tax office is buried in the churchyard. There's no procession, no eulogy. Just a wrapped body lowered into a trench by two men who say nothing. You nod to them. They don't nod back. Everyone grieves differently. Some with tears, some with prayer, some with complete withdrawal. You find yourself talking less, not from fear, just from exhaustion. Words are heavy now. They don't go as far as they used to. In the palace, things shift again. The halls that once held councils now hold silence. The guards still stand watch, but their armour is dulled, their eyes unfocused. There are fewer messengers, fewer decrees. Justinian lives, but you can feel him retreating. Into books, into solitude. Into the golden halls of the Hagia Sophia where no one dares disturb him. It's said he prays there alone now, hours at a time, surrounded by mosaics of saints who do not speak. Trade slows, the ports are still, the coins are fewer, the markets shrink. People stop asking about taxes, because there's nothing left to tax. The empire is still an empire, but it breathes through a straw. Even the senators have stopped wearing their rings. Power is difficult to perform when no one is watching. There's a chill that never quite leaves your bones, even on days that should be warmer, even under blankets, even beside the hearth. You think it's the weather. Then you wonder if it's just you. Because grief can settle into the skin like smoke, and fear can seep through mortar. And when everyone feels it at once, you stop calling it a feeling. You just call it normal. And so the city continues. Not strong, not proud. Just present. It doesn't fall, it doesn't rise, it endures. Not because of Justinian, not because of the laws, not because of faith or architecture or legacy. It endures because that's what cities do. They hold still while the world moves around them. Even if the world is dark, even if the world is dying. You stir your soup, you light a candle, you listen for a bell that hasn't rung in days, and you wait. Because something might return, or it might not. But until then, you are here, and the empire, whatever it has become, is here with you. You've walked through the dimness. You've felt the silence pressing against your ribs. You've seen cities hold their breath, and empires shrink beneath a sun that forgot how to shine. Now the question lingers, quiet and enormous. What happened? What made the sky go grey? What turned summer into winter, and light into memory? The people of 536 didn't know. They didn't have weather maps, or global communication, or satellites tracking ash across hemispheres. All they had were their eyes, their fields, their failing crops, their instincts. And those instincts told them only this: something was broken. They wrote what they could. In Constantinople, the court historian Procopius recorded, "The sun gave forth its light without brightness, like the moon, and it seemed exceedingly like the sun in eclipse." In Syria, Michael the Syrian would later write of a year with no proper harvest. In China, scribes noted frost in summer and snow falling in August. In Ireland, monks recorded that bread failed. In every corner of the world, from rice fields to river valleys, something went dark, but they didn't know why. Not then. Not for centuries. Not until much, much later, when the earth itself began to speak. Not with words, but with layers, with rings, with ice. Because the past may forget names, but it remembers what happened to trees. In the 1990s, scientists examining tree rings made a discovery. They noticed something strange in trees from Scandinavia, from Siberia, from the Alps, even the American Southwest. A sudden dip. The narrowest rings in 2,000 years. A sign that those years, 536, 537 and 538, were some of the coldest on record. Not a slow change, a sharp one, a snap. As if the world exhaled and forgot to breathe back in. Then came the ice. Cores drilled deep into Greenland and Antarctica held more than just frozen water. They held ash, volcanic glass, sulfur particles, a signature, faint but real. A message frozen in time, written in dust. The kind of message only a volcano can send. Suddenly, theories began to solidify. The culprit? A massive volcanic eruption, possibly in Iceland, or maybe in North America, or Central America. No one is entirely sure. But the ash didn't stay local. It didn't settle quietly. It rose into the stratosphere, high above the clouds, where winds carried it across continents, shading the earth from the sun. Imagine that. A mountain explodes in a place no one's ever heard of, and half the planet goes dark. Crops fail in China, bread vanishes in Ireland, a Byzantine emperor battles plague under a sky that never clears, all because of one moment, one rupture, maybe a mountain no one climbed, maybe a valley that cracked open, maybe fire that no one saw until it was too late, and maybe that would have been it. A single eruption, terrible and vast. But there's more. Because a few years later, in 540, tree rings dip again. Another drop. Another winter with no spring, which suggests something else. A second eruption. A 1-2 blow. An echo of suffering. First, the sky goes dark. Then, before the world can recover, it goes dark again. And this time people begin to break. But even now, we still don't know where it started. Iceland is one theory. So is El Salvador, home to Ilopango, a massive volcanic caldera that may have exploded right around then. Others say Alaska, or Indonesia, or somewhere we haven't even found yet. Because volcanoes don't always leave obvious clues. Sometimes they erase themselves in the act. And even if we found the exact crater, the smoking gun of this planetary winter, it wouldn't change much. The damage is already buried in centuries. It's in the books, the bones, the abandoned settlements, in forgotten ruins where moss covers stone, where skeletons lie in unmarked fields. We don't need to see the mountain. We're still living with its silence. What caused the darkness? A volcano. Maybe more than one. Maybe more than we'll ever know. But that's the thing about history. Even the loudest events can leave the quietest marks. The sun disappeared, the earth dimmed, and people, millions of them, kept walking through the shadows, trying to remember what light used to feel like. Centuries passed, the darkness faded, the crops returned, empires rose again, and the people who lived through 536 slowly died with their stories. Their memories were never written in books, their fears never labelled, just fragments remained. A scribbled note in an Irish chronicle, a phrase in a Chinese court record, a sentence from a Byzantine historian. A most dread portent took place. Then silence. For a long time, the year 536 was nothing but a footnote. Too vague, too distant, too quiet. But the earth remembers what people forget. And so we started digging. It began, as so many rediscoveries do, in pieces. A tree ring here, a sulphur deposit there, a black layer of soil found in a peat bog. Each on its own meant little, but taken together, A whisper became a pattern. The trees first. They spoke the clearest. In Northern Europe, trees stopped growing. In Asia, in North America. Not just slowed, stopped. Their rings shrank like the world had forgotten what warmth was. To a tree, cold is not just temperature, it's survival. When a tree struggles, it says so. In lines, in rhythm, in silence. And for 536, the silence was everywhere. Then came the ice. Deep cores drilled from the Greenland ice sheet, the kind that trap time inch by inch, snowfall by snowfall. Each layer a year, each speck of dust a visitor from the past. And in the layers for 536 and 540, something strange appeared. Ash. Volcanic glass. Tiny shards of a distant explosion. The kind of fragments that float in the upper atmosphere. The kind that block sunlight. The kind that don't settle for years. Alongside the ash, sulfur. Lots of it. Not just a spike, a wall. A chemical fingerprint of something immense and angry. Scientists compared ice samples from Greenland to Antarctica. The results matched. Whatever happened, it wasn't local. It didn't just dim the sky over Europe or Asia, it reached both ends of the planet. And that's when the story changed. This wasn't just a bad harvest. It wasn't just a cold year. It was a global climate event, a volcanic winter. But which volcano? That's the mystery that still hasn't found a single name. Some say Iceland. There are deposits that seem to match the chemistry. Others say Central America. The eruption of Ilopango, modern-day El Salvador, was vast and may have sent ash halfway around the world. There are candidates in Alaska, in Indonesia, even the Kamchatka Peninsula. Each eruption leaves clues. But ash doesn't always travel in a straight line, and ice doesn't keep perfect records. Some layers shift, some melt, some disappear altogether. The truth hides not in what we find, but in how much we're missing. So scientists dig and compare and analyse. They send particles through microscopes, they model wind patterns, they check sediment on the floors of ancient lakes. Sometimes they find a breakthrough, a sulfur anomaly, a match in trace elements, a perfect overlap in timing. And then it vanishes again, challenged, revised, delayed by another discovery. Because the past doesn't like to give up its secrets, it prefers to mumble. But the pattern is clear. Whatever happened in 536 was not a single event. It was a cascade, a sequence. A massive eruption in 536. Another, maybe larger, in 540. Possibly a third one in 547. Each one dimming the world, slowing the sun, stretching winter across years. And somewhere between those years, the plague arrived. Not a coincidence, because cold weakens crops, famine weakens bodies, and weak bodies fall easily to disease. It wasn't just darkness, it was everything that followed. The historian Michael McCormick once called 536 the beginning of the worst period to be alive, and yet, people survived. They adapted, they told stories, they kept lighting fires even when the flames gave no heat. We know this because we're still here, because the trees grew again, the skies cleared, the sun returned, not suddenly, not with celebration, but with slow, reluctant light. And even now, with satellites and climate models and DNA analysis, we still don't know everything. The volcano may remain unnamed, the full toll may never be counted, the exact cause might always stay just out of reach. But that's okay, because sometimes history doesn't need answers, just remembrance, a record, a whisper, a way to say, this happened, we endured it, and we didn't forget. In times of confusion, the powerful look for clarity. And in 536 there was none. The skies had gone dim, the harvest had failed, the cold would not leave, and yet people still expected answers. So the powerful, kings, emperors, priests, scribes, did what they always do. They wrote, they measured, they speculated, they told everyone that this could be explained, even when they didn't believe it themselves. In China, court scholars turned to the heavens. They studied eclipses, comet paths, and celestial omens. They consulted star charts. They cross-referenced seasons and floods with dynastic virtue. They looked upward, searching for reasons in the constellations. It had snowed in summer. The crops had failed. That much was clear. What wasn't clear was who to blame. Was it the emperor? A loss of the mandate of heaven? Was the dynasty corrupt? Were the ancestors displeased? In the Liang dynasty, court scribes documented what they could. Snow in August, yellow dust falling from the sky, famine in the fields, livestock dying without cause. They weren't poets, they weren't prophets, they were administrators with ink and worry, and their scrolls now serve as fossilised fear. In Ireland, anonymous monks kept short records in the margins of religious calendars. Not long entries, just brief fading lines. A failure of bread. The sun dark. No crops. Written with the tone of someone trying not to think too hard. Just noting facts, letting others decide what they meant. These annals were not designed for emotion. They were meant for memory. And the fact that they still exist means someone thought this moment mattered. In the Byzantine Empire, things were more complicated. The empire was built on theology and bureaucracy, on laws written in gold and churches paved in light. When the light vanished, it wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a crisis of meaning. How could God's favoured city live beneath a sunless sky? Why would the divine allow famine? Why would the heavens go silent? Philosophers debated quietly. Theologians wrote long, circular letters. Astrologers dusted off charts they hadn't touched in years. But no one could make the math work. Some suggested the sun was changing, that it had grown sick or tired, that the moon had become jealous, that the sky itself had turned inward. Others reached for prophecy, that this was the end of days, that revelation had come quietly, that judgment had arrived not with trumpets, but with grey skies and unripe grain. A few suggested sin, that this was punishment, always a safe bet. Punishment requires no explanation, only a target. And then there were those who wrote nothing, who simply withdrew, to estates in the mountains, to villas by the sea, to monasteries far from cities. The elite could afford silence, and many chose it. While the fields went barren, they gathered in stone halls, drank thinned wine, and told each other that this was temporary, that the world had always been unstable, that the poor would suffer as they always had, that God would restore balance in time. Then they closed their shutters and stoked their fires a little higher. But even privilege has limits, because when the crops fail everywhere, when the sun doesn't shine for anyone, money means less. The market stalls close, the olive oil spoils, the servants stop showing up, even the estates grow cold, and the questions return. Not whispered this time, but muttered over half-empty bowls. Is this a punishment? Is it over? Are we next? In places like Persia, Ethiopia, Yemen, and the borderlands between empires, the elite watched not with panic, but with calculation. Was this the time to invade, to strike a weakened enemy, or to retreat and wait? The world was uncertain, and that made it dangerous, so they adjusted. Not to understand the darkness, but to survive it. They gathered food reserves, redirected caravans, moved their courts inland. Power, they knew, is most fragile when people ask too many questions. Better to seem certain, even when the stars said otherwise. And so, across the world, those with access to temples, courts, towers, scrolls, did what they could. They wrote, they observed, they guessed. Some tried to control the narrative, others tried to ignore it. A few, perhaps, simply stared at the sky and waited for it to turn blue again. They may have been emperors, or bishops, or astronomers, but in the end, they were just people too. People with robes instead of cloaks, but no more certainty than anyone else. Because how do you lead when the world has lost its rhythm? When the sun is a rumour? When the seasons forget their names? When the harvest is gone and the people stop praying? You issue decrees, you hold fast to old rituals, you speak of order, but deep down, you wonder if the world has slipped just slightly off its axis. And if anything you say matters at all, they tried, of course. The rich always do. They closed their shutters, moved to country estates, paid for stronger roofs and thicker cloaks, stockpiled olive oil, wine, honey, salted meat, enough to wait out the storm. But the storm wasn't a season, it wasn't a war, or a bandit uprising, or a brief famine. It was the world, changing, shrinking, darkening, and you can't outspend the sun. In the hills outside Constantinople, villas stood like miniature kingdoms, marble columns, walled gardens, storerooms lined with amphorae. Inside, warmth, curtained windows, carpet imported from Syria, mosaics of gods who no longer answered. The wine still flowed, the fires still burned, but the fruit bowl sat empty. The bread was thin, The servants left early to visit their own families. Even in luxury, the cold found its way in. Letters from the countryside began to slow, not because there was no news, but because there was no point in sharing it. "What would I say?" one official wrote. "That the figs failed? That the bees are gone? That I've started measuring light by the hour and not the day?" The parchment remained blank. The ink dried in the well. Even correspondence felt futile, because what was there to plan for when the sun no longer seemed interested in returning? Some tried to host feasts, distractions, banquets beneath lamplight, meat cooked over perfumed wood, flute players hired to drown out the wind. But even laughter felt different now. Hollow, too loud in quiet rooms, too brief to matter. The fire crackled, the wine was good, but no one asked for seconds, and when the guests left, they walked through fog instead of moonlight. Elsewhere in the empire, rich landowners ordered their estates to switch crops. More barley, fewer grapes. Cattle were sold, pastures left untended. Even those with gold couldn't make things grow. And gold doesn't fill a bowl, doesn't warm your hands, doesn't stop the silence from settling in every corner of the house. Some nobles turned to religion, donated to churches, built shrines, sponsored prayers. In Rome, aristocrats gave away land, not out of generosity, but as a kind of celestial insurance. If the gods were angry, better to be seen repenting. If God had withdrawn his light, better to light a candle in his name. And so they did. Again and again. Candles flickering in cathedrals that smelled of incense and damp stone. It didn't make the sun return, but it made the darkness feel organised. Others just disappeared. They retreated entirely, to villas no one visited, to mountains no one climbed, to silence that no one broke. Some wrote in journals, some painted sun symbols on their walls, some simply waited for answers, for warmth, for anything. And yet, even in their isolation, the chill crept in. It found its way through silk, through carved lintels, through heavy drapes. It moved slowly like a guest no one invited who refuses to leave. And one morning a noblewoman in Cappadocia woke to frost on the inside of her window. She had 12 servants, 15 rooms, a brazier in every hallway. But the cold didn't care, because the sky didn't care, and the sky was the one with the final word. The rich still had more options, more cushions, more time, but they also had more to lose, and they were losing it. Not in fires or battles, but in spoiling stores, cracked tiles, empty letters, fruit trees that blossomed too early, then died in silence. A slow erosion of certainty, and even the gold they clutched more tightly began to feel heavy, not because it was valuable, but because it had become irrelevant. Eventually they stopped trying, stopped pretending, stopped performing stability. The laughter grew quieter, the banquets rarer, the candles shorter. They began to dress like the poor, eat like the poor, think like the poor. Because the sky had levelled them all, it didn't matter how many coins sat in the chest. When the world forgets the sun, it forgets everyone equally. It didn't happen all at once. There was no trumpet, no great return of warmth, no day when people pointed to the sky and said, "Finally." The clouds simply began to thin, not disappear, just soften. The light returned, not as gold, but as grey touched with promise. The winds shifted. The trees grew wider rings. The birds came back. And the people, who had never really stopped walking, kept walking still. By the early 540s, the sky began to remember what blue looked like. The sun came back, shy at first, warming some places more than others, lingering longer than it had in years. The crops didn't explode in bounty, but they grew, slowly, tenderly, like the world wasn't sure it was safe to flourish yet. People rebuilt fences, replanted fields, rewrote calendars. They gave thanks, or didn't. Some were too tired, but they lived, and that was enough. In Constantinople, Justinian ruled for another 2 decades. He recovered, he legislated, he dreamed of restoring the empire, but he never quite outran the shadow of those years. The plague never truly left, the warmth never returned to what it had been. His victories grew quieter, his world a little smaller, and the people who lived under his reign remembered the sun less as a guarantee and more as a gift. In the centuries that followed, the year 536 faded into the background. Just one more distant storm in the long unsteady weather of history, but the traces remained, in tree rings, in ice cores, in lines scratched into vellum by tired hands in cold monasteries. And now we look back and see it for what it was. A year without light, a planet in pause, a moment where everything slowed down and nearly came apart. It wasn't the end of the world, but it was a reminder that the world can change, abruptly, impersonally, and without asking for permission. No great battle, no new king, just a few invisible particles and a sky that turned its face away. And yet, the world kept turning, even in the dark, even in the cold, even when the sun forgot how to rise. And so did the people. They cooked, they walked, they waited, they planted seeds, even when they doubted they'd ever sprout. And some of them did. Because that's what we do. We keep going, even through grey skies and empty fields. We find warmth in borrowed cloaks and quiet conversations and half-remembered dreams of summer. So tonight, as you lie beneath your own ceiling with your own warmth, in your own time, you can remember. We've survived worse. We've walked through ash and hunger and silence. And still, the sun returned. It always does. Eventually. Sleep well. The sky's clear tonight, and the sun, for now, is right where it belongs.